Good morning, everybody. We'll just get started in a moment. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us this morning to our webinar where we're going to be talking about defining the difference between a project and business as usual. So just some housekeeping rules. First, to say the session is being recorded and it will be available on the Hart Square website later on today. You'll see there is a Q&A box, and this is for any questions that you have for myself and John and Billy. Please do put in any questions. We want this to be as interactive and as useful as possible, so please do put them in throughout the session and we'll cover off as many as we can, and if we don't get to cover any off, we will follow up afterwards. You'll also notice that there's a chat box, so that's for more any sort of technical support questions or any more general sort of questions for Hart Square. So if you please put them in there, and my lovely colleague Rebecca is in the background and she'll be keeping an eye on those. So I'm Joyce Harman, I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Hart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the two lovely gentlemen this morning. So John, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Hello, yes, I'm John Eaton, the Communications and Digital Engagement Director at Epilepsy Action.
Perfect, thanks John. And Billy.
I'm Billy Peter, Senior Business Change Consultant here at Housekeeping.
Fantastic, thank you. And John and Billy will be telling us a bit more about themselves when we get to the questions later on. So just quickly, for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, just to say that we are an independent consultancy practice and we work only in the not-for-profit sector. And everything that we do is about the needs of our client and nothing else. And obviously we do educational events to the sector like this webinar. So I want to run a quick poll question. So this is really just to give us an idea of who's with us this morning and sort of where they are with regard to running projects. So if you bear with me while I pull up the poll. So the question we're asking is, do you have a clear understanding of when a piece of work must take on a full project management approach? So do you have a kind of clear understanding of what is a project, or what is just sort of business as usual? So I'll just let that run for another few seconds. Interesting mix coming in at the moment. Yes is winning, which is a good start. So bear with me. Okay, let me end the poll and I'll just share the results. So interesting, 48% are saying yes, that they do have a clear understanding. So that's really good. That's really, really positive. But then it's kind of equally nearly about the same when you add up the no's and unsure. So I think we're a 50-50 in essence, really. So that's really quite interesting. So it'll be, hopefully some of the topics that we're covering will be useful for that. But equally, again, as I say, if there's anything else, please put in your questions into the Q&A box. So let me just stop sharing that. So looking at when we were talking about this as a possible webinar topic, and Billy has written an article around this as well, but it very much came about from conversations we have with clients around, understanding, we're very often asking, but why do I need a project management approach, to this project? Can I not just do it the way I do? Sort of, we do all of our sort of internal work. So it's what we really break it down into kind of, I suppose, two questions really. Is the piece of work that you're doing sort of a temporary piece of work? It's got a clear endpoint. So to give it two examples really, when you think about things like member renewals, so generally speaking, these are run once a year. There's a very clear set of activities and processes and communications that happen in running up to the renewals period, the activities at the actual renewal time, and then post renewals, and that there's a very clear endpoint, and that is to get all members renewed and to take away any lapsed people and things like that. So it's a very clear piece of work, clear processes in place, and a clear endpoint. Or it might be something like you're running an annual fundraising campaign. It might be that your organisation is very much involved with the London Marathon, and this runs every year, and there's a very clear campaign that runs all throughout the year, getting the people involved, running up to it over that weekend, and then afterwards, and it's all around fundraising. So again, you have a team or people that work around that, clear processes that you go through, but the clear end point is the marathon has now run. You've done your fundraising activities, and then that project is now finished for that year. So this would be considered, this is very much, you know, your business as usual. This is part of what you do as an organization, be it a charity or membership body or whatever type of organization that you are. Then the second question really, and this is more thinking about if this is actually a project, is around, you know, is this a unique piece of work that you're doing? Is there a defined purpose? So, you know, an example of that might be that you're looking to increase, you know, fundraising, that you're looking to replace your CRM. And the reason for that is that, you know, the system that you have in place, you know, it can't process gift aid, or you can't log the campaigns or anything like that very easily. And so the decision has been made, you know, as well as many other reasons, as well as just fundraising, and the decision has been made to say, we need a new CRM system put in place. There's some very clear defined benefits and goals with regard to this project. Or it might be that you're looking to do much more personalization to your members on your website. It might be that you're looking to make some changes to the website structure, or you might be looking to make it, you know, develop and implement a whole new website. So again, there's very clear goals against these projects, very clear set time frame for these, because I suppose the main difference is being where you will do your member renewals again, you can do your annual fundraising campaigns again. You are not going to be doing a CRM project or a website project every year, and you certainly shouldn't be. And if you are, that's in itself is a slightly different issue. So that it's very clear about what is a temporary piece of work that has a clear goal and an endpoint, and what is something that is a very defined piece of work, that it's a unique piece of work, and it's something you're not looking to repeat time after time after time. So the big thing that always comes up when we start talking about the difference between business as usual and projects, really resourcing is the one that for me is the standout on the project, because when you're running a project, there is a number of roles and responsibilities that you need on a project. And very often there's lots of conversations around, but do we really need all of these roles? But the point is, if you're running a project, absolutely yes, you do. So you need to be having, you know, allocated project sponsor, your project lead, your project manager, your data or your technology lead, and your subject matter experts. So these will mainly be people that are coming from your staff, from people who are doing the business as usual jobs, and that are going to be coming into those roles. So I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. But when you're talking about business as usual, this is work that's carried out within people's current job descriptions, current job roles. There's no additional resource or roles required. And that would be one of the big fundamental differences. There is a lot of crossover when you talk about resources and where resources can come from. So, you know, of all the sort of roles that I've on that previous slide, very often what will happen is that, for example, the project lead, this is absolutely somebody that has to be an internal role because of the knowledge and information that they have. And so therefore, it may be a consideration that you need to backfill their role. Some part of what they do, you know, as part of business as usual, they're not going to have the capacity to do that. So therefore, how is that gap going to be filled? So you need to consider possibly backfill, or what other things could be done on that. The really, really important part about when you're bringing existing staff in on a project is to think about the skill sets, because very often, and I have seen it recently at another client, where there was a list of all the different job roles, and then it was a general conversation around, okay, well, who wants to do this? Who wants to fill in these roles, these gaps that we have, but without taking any consideration for the skills that are required for those roles. So, you know, an example I will always give is around project management. A project manager is not just there for diary management. And this is a conversation I have over and over with people. There is a very particular skill set that is needed as a project manager. And I know that John and Billy will probably have a lot to say on this as well. But it's very clear that when you look at those roles to see if the people have the skills in place, particularly as well around the project lead, because the project lead is going to be the person who understands the organization really well, but that they can, you know, make the decisions that are needed, but that they have the skills to be able to communicate widely with the rest of the project team and all of those kind of things. So skill set is really, really important when you're thinking about the project and what those resources are going to be. It is absolutely sensible and, you know, to bring in external resources on projects for specific skill gaps that you have. very common is that you will bring in project managers, or you will bring in people to work on sort of the data side of things, the data management side of things, when you're getting into data migration and all of that kind of thing. So it's very often that external resources are brought in to look at that. And this slide, which whenever I put up generally terrifies everybody, but it's really important to show the very difference for me is around when you're doing a project versus business as usual, is looking at these different roles and what they look like. One of the questions we often get asked is, we're just doing a really small project, or we're a really small organization, we don't have all of these different roles in-house, we can't do this, can any of this be shared, or can we just outsource it all? So the things that are very important to take into consideration is that the roles that absolutely must be from internal resource that you cannot outsource are going to be your project sponsor, because the project sponsor is the person ultimately responsible for this project. You cannot outsource that responsibility. It's really important on every project that there is a strong project sponsor driving this project through, so that they can make the decisions that are right for you as an organization. The business lead, this is a role that is definitely has to be an internal person, because it has to be somebody who knows the organization inside out, all the nuances about you as an organization, and that they can make business decisions. They can be very much involved in testing and signing off specs and all of that kind of thing. This is one role that we would say could be a shared role. Ideally, this would be one person, but because of capacity and that question of the size of, if you're a small organization, this can be a shared role, but again, making sure there's clear parameters of what that shared role is and who's responsible for doing what. The data lead, again, must be somebody internal, because nobody can tell you what data you need to retain. Nobody can tell you what data is important to you as an organization. You can absolutely bring in some additional support around data to help through that process and that management of all that data, but ultimately somebody internally has to be responsible for the data governance on any project. And then your subject matter experts, these are your staff. These are the people who are going to be doing the testing. They're going to be using the new system, the new technology, whatever the new project's going to be delivering. So they are key. They can only be internal people. Absolutely, one role that can be external is the project manager. You can bring in somebody externally that has the skill set. And the difference is, well, a conversation that I was often had about the time required for a project manager. If you bring in an external project manager, their time can be slightly less, more like 2 to 3 days a week, because they are literally coming in to focus on that project and nothing else. They're not getting involved into conversations about business as usual. Whereas an internal project manager, as much as we will always say, if they're an internal project manager, their focus needs to just be on the project. But we always know in reality, they're going to get dragged off into other conversations of business as usual. And so therefore, they need to be on this, 5 days a week. It's really, really important. So I suppose the main point around this is just saying, when you're looking at what is the difference between a project and business as usual, if you're going into project mode, you need to take into consideration, what is it? What are the goals? What is the end goal we're trying to do? What is the benefits we're trying to get out from this, very clear, defined piece of work? And what are the roles and responsibilities that we need? And that making sure right at the start of the project, when you have a conversation with people about these different roles, that you identify them right at the start. You don't get halfway through a project and suddenly assign somebody as a business lead. It has to be done right from the start, and everybody has to be bought in to whatever their various roles in. So it's really, really important. But enough from me. I'm now going to bring in John and Billy. So John, I suppose, can you tell us a little bit more about background about you and sort of the projects that you've been working on recently?
Yeah, no problem. So I've been with Epilepsy Action for about 2.5 years now. And prior to that, I worked supplier side. So I worked for 2 big website building agencies, which did lots of integration work, and a branding and marketing agency after that. So since I've been at Epilepsy Action, my team has grown to now be 13 people when we're fully staffed. And we've got lots of business as usual work. We've also got quite a few projects going on. So I make it 4 currently on the books. We've got a e-learning course upgrade that we're doing. We have a website project that's ongoing at the moment. We've got a branding project where we're looking to kind of do a 1.5 version of our brand guidelines to match our new website look and feel. And then we've got the CRM project that we're running with Hart Square and our CRM implementation partner as well.
Perfect. I like that you just kind of say, oh, just 4. They're all 4 significant major projects.
Yeah.
So, and even more appreciate you taking the time this morning because I know how busy you are. So I suppose from your point of view, and say from all that experience, what would you make to define a piece of work, as a project, and that it's not BAU, and that have you found with the project you worked on in the past, is there a challenge in getting agreement on, taking a project approach on those different bits of work?
I think for me, the word project's got a lot of emotional resonance with people. If you tell people they're going into projects, they have a way of mentally preparing themselves for the fact that this isn't going to be business as usual by definition, which can be really useful in terms of focusing people in. I think one of the things that often makes something a project rather than business as usual is the money involved. So as project sponsor or sponsor of a piece of BAU work, if it gets over a certain amount, you start to think that really, in order to make sure that I don't do a bad job of spending this money, I need the rigor of a project structure around this. So one of the things that I do, because when I was working supplier side, it used to really infuriate me, the amount of time it took for a business case to build up to the size of being a project. And I just have to be honest, that just takes ages, doesn't it? It just takes forever to actually get the momentum behind something. But in the early stages, what I try and do is model using something like RACI, so who's responsible, accountable, consulted and informed in this piece of work, to try and work out the overall size of the project team and make sure that the people who I think are going to be really critical to it being involved, being successful, are up for being involved and engaged. So that's really critical. And I think the other thing is, don't be afraid to put something into a project framework, even if it's been presented to you as business as usual. So at the moment, we've got all those projects that I mentioned on the CRM projects. We've already got, now that people are starting to see what possibilities are out there with our new system, people coming to me with things that they're presenting as business as usual. But actually, I know that to coordinate that effectively and spend that money well, we need to be looking at those from a project mindset. So I think that's I know a sort of fairly loose and kind of in some ways ambiguous way of defining it, but hopefully that helps people to think about things a little bit. No,
I think that makes perfect sense. And as you say as well, particularly around, the budget, when there's money involved, there's a lot more scrutiny, isn't there, on projects? So absolutely, it's putting that framework in makes sense. Billy, just to bring you in, I suppose tell us first a bit about your background and experience, and what have you seen with clients when they're trying to define what they're trying to do and how they're going to manage it?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I've worked at Hart Square for over 4 years, across the NFP sector for over 7 years, including 3.5 years at Cancer Research UK, working in different teams, including their technology team. I've also worked with a broad range of clients while being at Hart Square on different technology projects, from small business cases to implementation of a new CRM. And I think every project I've seen at the start, it's always a really exciting part of the project for me, because people come with lots of big ideas and lots of sort of thoughts on how we can develop those ideas. And I think actually at the start, it's almost about trying to sort of narrow those specific aims down almost and make them measurable and deliverable. So when you get to sort of the end of that phase 1, if you like, or minimum viable product, you've got a specific, you can measure how successful that project's been against your aims. But that's not, even though the project might end there, that's not the end of the work, if you see what I mean. And like John was saying, there's other ideas can come around and you can get a phase 2, a phase 3. It's almost like a never-ending development. And so I think it's sort of almost trying to narrow that down at the start so you can measure something, but then building on that and almost building it into BAU as you sort of go through the different phases and understanding of the technology. Yeah,
absolutely, makes sense. So John, when you're thinking, well, especially all the projects you've got on I'll go in a minute, when you're thinking about embarking on a project, what considerations do you need to take when you're thinking about skills and resources in-house to deliver the project? And do you think that the backfilling of roles and projects is the best way to tackle resources and taking them away from business, from business as usual? Just interested sort of your approach around that and things you need to think about.
So I think one of the things that I've I found really interesting since I've moved client side is that there's, I think, two distinctions to draw. There's, first of all, do you have the capability in-house? And I think if you go around saying you don't, that can really alienate people you might need. So that's a dangerous thing to do. So I think the second thing to think about is whether you've got the impartiality or the capacity, which is an easier thing to sell internally. And I think, to talk about our project, one of the things I was really keen on in relation to project management is that there wasn't loads of people here who'd done this sort of work before. And I was really keen that we had some external eyes on us just to make sure that our behaviors were correct. So that was really critical for us. So I think those would be the two things that I would say is, first of all, do you have the capability? If you don't have the capability, I think it's key then not to tell everybody that you don't think they're very good. That's never a good idea. And if you do have the capability, but the impartiality or capacity isn't there, then don't be afraid to bring in external help. In some ways, it would be completely mad for you to try and recruit somebody who does the precise job that you're looking to buy over the next 12 to 18 months. You're talking about, often, particularly in the charity sector, we were doing a management training thing yesterday, and we're talking about how in terms of different communication styles, the charity sector tends to sort of have quite a lot of the same people who are very empathetic, people who are very amiable. But project management at times can be really, really, really difficult and require you to really drive things hard and say uncomfortable things and be really brutal. And actually recruiting that kind of person into a charity is, I'd imagine, a pretty risky thing to do. So actually having somebody on the outside with a defined role who can, be frank, kick ass when they need to is really important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree on both points. I mean, the skills bit, certainly saying to people, we haven't got these skills in-house is not going to win any friends on the project, especially when you're embarking on a long-term project. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, bring in the experience where you need it. Bring in those, the critical friend who you see can give you a bit of a kick when needed. Make sure to keep everything on track. No, completely agree. Billy, what would you say, in your experience, is the biggest challenge on projects and the impact of business as usual? Because obviously you're often client-side project manager. So, what do you see as the biggest challenges on the impact?
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. I think especially that I agree with the points that John's made. I think for me, the biggest challenge is having the right resources in place internally, but also ensuring they can then commit the necessary time. So, I know that slide you shared around time, that often is the case, and there will be peaks and troughs, and it will vary from project to project, but projects are intense and require real specific focus at key points throughout a project life cycle. So I think, you really need to make sure that your resources can commit that time to do it. And this will shift focus away from those BAU activities or BAU work for a period of time. And I think, therefore, you do need to plan that accordingly. And I think if you can do that, actually, you can minimize the disruption. But I think, making sure that you've got the right people in the right place, I think, is the biggest challenge. But it will impact on BAU because those people in the business will be taken away from some of those activities at different points in the project.
Yeah, definitely. We've got lots of questions coming in, which is great. So I'll be getting to those in a few minutes. So I suppose, following on from that, John, if I come to you first on this, on the many projects you've worked on currently, but also over the years, what have you seen as the biggest risk to business as usual when you're carrying out a large project?
I think a massive risk for the charity sector or third sector is that change management has to come hand in hand with big bits of work, big bits of project work, and often there is barriers to change. So the last big project I was involved in when I was supplier side was a £2 billion startup, and they had literally a culture where you would come into work on a Monday and somebody would say, we're in project, we're doing something completely random. And that would just mean that all of your plans for all the things you were going to do would be gone. You would just get on with what the CEO told you to do that week. now I know that the charity sector is never going to be like that, but I think one of the challenges that I've had around change management is we are by nature very concerned about needing to have the capacity available to deliver the services that we deliver and to deliver the income that we need to deliver. But I think the thing that we've tried to do is give people the empowerment to be able to make decisions around things that they would normally do as part of business as usual, that they don't have to do anymore because there's other things we want them to do that's a better use of their time. Because I think no matter how you resource plan for a big project, it's actually impossible to get to a point where you can allow for all the capacity challenges that a big project will bring, because it involves people, things will go wrong, deadlines will be missed, there will be flashpoints. So for example, last night I was reading training agendas at 11:30 at night. Part of that was my own fault because I have 2 small children. I needed to do things with them at one point, late in the afternoon yesterday. So I think basically just empower people to be able to free themselves from the sort of ties of business as usual. And if there are things that they feel as though they can let slide for a little bit and it's not going to massively affect everybody else, let them do it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Billy, your same question to you.
Yeah, I think I completely agree actually with John's point around having that supportive culture in place. I think if you've got that, I think it goes back to that point I was saying around just resource and time. But I think if you're aware of the disruption that projects can bring, and you've got that supportive culture internally to allow people that extra sort of brain space, if you like, to focus on those project activities, I think it can really make a big difference to sort of being upfront and honest about that. When you're doing a project, there will be some disruption, but I think if you can give people that support and space to focus on those project activities and allow them that space, then I think like John said, you empower people, and I think actually that will get better results in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose following on from that, maybe John, if I come to you first, how have you gone about preparing staff for the impact on business as usual? Was there any kind of governance structures you put in place? I know you also mentioned about communication, that's really key, but is there any structures you put in place or you would recommend putting in place, kind of based on sort of your experience on your more recent projects and past projects?
Yeah, I think the thing that's probably been most challenging for me so far this year is that we've sort of paid we've tried to do the internal communications really well, but to be honest, they've been an afterthought sometimes rather than proactively planned. So at one point I was trying to do those updates to staff myself, while also being project sponsor across 4 different projects, and it just wasn't really working. So we brought in somebody else internally to run those internal communications, and already in the time that Josh has been doing it, it's been immeasurably better than I was doing it. So I think what staff want to know is what's the impact on them ultimately. When do they need to be making time in their diaries to do things? That's really critical. But I think the other thing that's really important to remember when you're doing the internal communications is that until this thing is live and business as usual, you're selling it to every single stakeholder in your organization to some extent. You're selling it to the people who are going to be using that system because they need to be bought into it before they start to adopt it. And you're selling it to everybody else because internally, if you think about internal communications as a sort of methodology, what you're trying to do is build equity in the internal communications brand. So you're trying to tell everybody this is a good organization to be a part of. It's moving in the right direction. And most organizations that I've worked with, particularly those I've worked with in the charity space, I should mention I'm also a trustee on another charity, they've got scars of previous projects that have gone wrong, and a degree of a mixture of sort of I told you so merchants who think nothing's ever achievable, and also people who are just burned and think that they're a bit underconfident that they can't do things. So I think the internal communications has got to provide that belief, I think.
Yeah, great point. Billy, same question to you.
Yeah, I agree. I think communications is so critical, especially at the start of a project, and making people aware of the timelines, and also understanding where the peaks and troughs might be in people's work, so obviously working with charities, understanding where their peak fundraising season is, when the London Marathon is, obviously we've got that coming up. So being aware of that at the start can mean you can then work with, your technology supplier to then sort of build some contingency around that. And I think in terms of sort of governance, just in terms of project governance, I think by having a project team of those sort of key subject matter experts and the project lead and a project board with, maybe your project sponsor and the CEO, that allows another sort of forum for you to deliver messages that then can get cascaded back to the organization as part of that regular comms that John was talking about, but also it can allow messages to be delivered back to the project team about any concerns and any risks, and allow us to address that as well. So I think there's a mixture of things, but I think it all fundamentally comes down to really strong communications and keeping people updated. And I think if you do that, I think that can really allay any fears.
Yeah, definitely. Well, great to see lots of questions coming in for you guys. So then kind of, I suppose, thinking about the transitioning from, if you've completed, a big project like CRM or a website, and it's taken a lot of time, it's taken a lot of resource, a lot of money, a lot of commitment. How do you start transitioning people back into business as usual? Billy, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's actually something you almost need to start for planning actually quite early in the project. I think it's important almost to set up that internal group of champions or those SMEs to almost champion the project and prepare people for the changes that are coming. And I think having that sort of project team still in place post project to sort of monitor how the project's being delivered, check in on people, because it is still will be a period of disruption after that project has gone live, because like we've sort of said, there's a big period of change. So I think almost having that sort of team of champions and allowing people then to sort of address any concerns. I think it comes back to that point we talked about earlier about culture. If you've got the right culture that enables people to flag any concerns and to that team, and then you can look at addressing them. So I think sort of preparing as early as possible will be critical, but also don't just disband that project team as soon as you've gone live, because there will be a period of change as the organization adapts. And I think that way you can help people transitioning to that BAU by being really clear and upfront.
Yeah, definitely. John?
I think totally agree with everything that Billy said. Preparation is absolutely key. I think the only thing I'd add to it is you want a lot of people to have some level of skin in the game as you return to BAU. So I think sometimes in project it can become really easy to forget how this big thing that you've been working on for ages ties back into your own personal objectives or motivating factors for doing the job that you do. So I think it's important for the managers of staff who are using systems that are new to encourage and to continue to praise after we've gone live. And like Billy says, once you've gone live, that isn't really the end of the project. It's almost, the next phase of the project, isn't it? So I think a lot of people forget that bit and just sort of put it live, think it's delivered, and then 6 months later find out that either no one's using it or no one's happy. So that's a really critical part of the plan.
Yeah, definitely. And then before we open up to the questions that we've coming in, so I'll come to you first, John. Top tips that you think would be important for people thinking about, undertaking a large project and how they can, ensure that business as usual is not adversely affected.
So I think that the top tip for me would be to do that piece of work as the project's gaining momentum before it becomes defined as a project, to work out who your key stakeholders are going to be and assess their level of buy-in and commitment and the things that they've got coming up, so that when you present this as something that's going to happen, they're not going to be people who can shoot it down before it's really got the chance to get anywhere. So I think that's the key thing, particularly if you're thinking about going out and getting external support for something. It's really key that you've sold in the reasons as to why you want an external project manager or an external agency with those key stakeholders before you present it back. I've worked with people before. So one of my previous jobs was in sort of new project sales, basically. And there's a really surprisingly high number of people who have all the right intentions to do a project, fail to engage the right stakeholders, take a really kind of quite well crafted thing to board and say, can this be signed off, please? And people go, just fundamentally no, because I don't want to do it, because I didn't know you were going to ask me for this money for this thing. And what typically happens in those situations is that the person who's been presented that will either leave or be moved off that project. But then a very similar structure to what they originally presented will be presented by somebody else who's got all the stakeholders aligned, and it'll get signed off and pushed through. So I think that's the key thing, is just get that list of people who are really critical, get them all in agreement before you present it, and then present it and get it signed off.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it, we always say that, projects are about people. It's all about people. You can't, if you forget about the people, then you're just kind of setting yourself up to failure at the start. Billy, your top tips.
Yeah, I think I would agree with everything John said. I think planning ahead is so important, but having agreement across the organisation from those key people that you can take on the project at this moment in time, as well as all the BAU activities that you're doing. I think, and being honest with people across the organisation, there could be some disruption across that period of time, but ultimately the benefits will outweigh some of those challenges. I think I would echo what John said, having buy-in from those key stakeholders for the project, with the resources to do the project is so critical, because ultimately delivering a new piece of technology is the fairly straightforward thing. It's the change that we've talked about, and people are the most important thing. And I think finally, just having that supportive staff culture, allow people almost to challenge the idea of why we're doing this and get them to buy in. I think if you can have that, I think you'll be prepared for the project and BAU.
Perfect. Right. So let me go to the questions. So any advice for getting over the "isn't that your job" issue and helping leaders appreciate that you need dedicated project time? I'm going to come to you, John, first on that one.
Yeah, the best statistic you can throw back at somebody, there's a blog article somewhere. If you Google what percentage of digital transformation projects fail, it's scary. It's something like 92%. So that's always been the thing that I've done. They say, yeah, by all means, you could tell me to try and deliver all this stuff internally, but ultimately, all I'm asking you, my manager, to do is sign off this decision. I'll manage it. I'll sponsor it. But if it all goes wrong, you're either going to have to fire me or seriously consider whether you should resign. And do you want to do that? And the knowledge that 92% of projects are going to fail, and you right at the start said that you didn't want to use any external resource.
Yeah, I love that. Billy, anything to add on that one?
No, I think I would agree with John. I think it's just about ensuring you've got the right resource, but having some of those honest conversations, like John said, I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. And being realistic right at the start. And I love that stat. I'm going to go and Google that afterwards, John. Next question in was, how can you best manage subject matter experts' time constraints in relation to BAU and the necessity of their focused input to the project? So the challenge always about the subject matter time constraints and how best to deal with that. John?
I've got to be honest, I'm not very good at this. Part of the problem is that you can sort of plan for our project with you guys. We did a really sort of detailed plan about all the SMEs we were going to need. And then when we actually came to doing it, we found that some of those SMEs were just incredibly keen and wanted to do loads more. And we were like, you're really good, so yes, we'll use you more. I suppose the key thing is to try and communicate to the managers of those people before you start to use their time what you think you're going to need. And I think just keep them abreast of what you actually have used. And you can make, you can sort of make changes based on that. So, for a website project, for example, we had an agreement where we're going to be speaking to one SME, and it transpired that actually, when we started talking to that department, somebody just knew loads of stuff. So we were like, well, you could have disruption across 2 or 3 staff members, or you give us one person and they'll do loads of things for us. And in the end, that manager said, well, just take the one person who's great, please. That's fantastic. So just be collaborative, I think would be my advice.
Yeah, definitely. Billy, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think I think what we do typically on projects is almost sit down at the start of a large implementation, say, and almost map out where we think, how many days, and it isn't an exact science, but roughly figure out how many days a week someone might need to commit on average over the project. And like John said, it's been really collaborative and being really honest. And there are peaks and troughs. When you're going through a discovery period, when you're, say, designing your specification, there might be a few more workshops people need to attend. Things like user testing and training, again, quite intense on those SMEs times. But then there could be periods of time where it is a bit quieter, and people, would have a 5-day week to focus on BAU. So I think, trying to map out at the start where those intensity points are, having agreement with them and their line managers, but being flexible, like John has said, I think is also really important. Actually, other people might need to come in, other people might leave. So I think being flexible, not too rigid, I think would be my advice on it.
Perfect. Oh, here's a good question for both of you. You might kill me for asking it. How to avoid scope creep? The big question, and just great question. Thanks, Nat. John, I'm going to come to you first.
Shock news: you can't really avoid scope creep if you do a project properly. If you take a very waterfall delivery approach, I can give you a horrifying example on this. I did a project about sort of 6-7 years ago that was a waterfall delivery, and there was a really strong feeling there could be absolutely no scope creep. So the organization we were working with had recently done a big restructure and made their CTO, Chief Technical Officer, redundant, but he'd agreed to stay on as a consultant. And in order to try and manage scope creep, he spent 18 months consistently rewriting specifications of his systems to try and avoid the fact that just fundamentally what we originally tried to do at the start was not what the business wanted 12 months down the line. This guy was, I think he got about a 50 grand payout when he got made redundant, and he was charging £600 a day, 5 days a week for 18 months. Basically my advice on scope creep would be just, you've got to listen to what that scope creep is. You've got to understand, are we just talking about the fact that fundamentally your requirements have changed? And if they have, then the way to manage that is to think about, well, is this something that we need, and we need everything else we've already specified, in which case we need more money, at least make a business case to do that? Or is this new requirement that we've got something that we now need, and that means we don't need something else, in which case you potentially swap out something that you've already got in scope for something that wasn't in scope previously. But just trying to cut it dead is just, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work, unfortunately. So I'm sorry to have asked that question, but I can't give a happy answer.
But it's a realistic answer, and that's the important point. Billy, I know you'll have an opinion on this one.
Yeah, so cut and dry, but I know I do agree with John. I think it's hard to avoid. I think depending on the project, I think the really important thing is getting to the specification or sign off of basically what you're going to produce. And I think, like John said, I think as your knowledge of the system evolves, as you maybe get some hands-on experience, especially doing an agile project, if you're doing quite user testing quite frequently, your knowledge and experience of the system will change, and other requirements might come in, and that is okay. But I think it's almost like, do we need this now? And if so, then that is okay, as long as there's a solid business case and there's a solid cost benefit analysis to it. And like John said, you actually might be able to push something else out to a later phase. So I think it is sort of accepting that it will happen, but I think as long as it's managed in a controlled way and you've got the right structures in place to assess every request that comes in, and it doesn't completely change the shape of the project, I think that is okay. But not letting it run wild, I think is the key, because otherwise your budget and time will disappear.
I think the other thing to say on this point actually is, when we're talking about scope creep, often if you are managing the project management budget, so the implementation budget, you're focused on the fact that you don't want the overall cost to go up. But there is a cost to a project in negotiating and managing scope. There's a cost around momentum because you slow things down. There's a cost around time internally because you're having to go around lots of different people and say, we agreed this, we're asked to do this, we don't want to do this, do you agree, do you not agree? That takes time. And there's also often a hidden cost in relation to a project, because often it happens right at the beginning. So you think as though the supplier you're working with, out of the goodness of their hearts, are having these week-long conversations with you, like that's billable time, and like you shouldn't expect that a supplier is going to just go, yeah, you're changing your mind, therefore we'll give you days and days of our resource to allow you to explore that stuff. It's putting you back into discovery. So so particularly when I was supplier side, both in projects that I was managing and in projects that I was sort of on the periphery of, you saw nasty builds for that sort of stuff coming down the line. So you'd end up getting towards the sort of later delivery stages and finding out you were 30k, 40k short of being able to actually deliver, which is a really difficult thing to go back and have to ask for later.
I think just one further point I would add to that, I think it kind of almost also depends when in the project you're adding scope creep. If you add new requirements at the end of user testing and you're a month before go live, like John said, that could be quite costly. But if you first time you see a system, say part of a playback, and actually something else has changed, say there's some new legislation that's come in and that you fundamentally need to do something different, then that is okay. I think it's almost like, if you get towards the end of a project a week before go live, and you start adding scope, that's probably where you want to avoid it. But I think early in the project, I think if it's managed in a controlled way, I think that's kind of okay.
And I suppose just on that as well, thinking about, because it's a conversation I have a lot with people around contingency. Should you have a contingency budget? Because very often people think if you put in contingency,
yes,
it's just going to be spent. Yeah, so I was going to say, John, your views.
Yeah, you definitely need a contingency budget. You absolutely do. There's just no other way around it. Because if you don't have one, the sod's law is you will definitely need it. And if you do have one, you might find actually things become a bit easier towards the end of the project. It might be you've got another project going on which is under-resourced, even if you've got a contingency on it, in which case you can potentially flip the funds over to spend it there instead. But if you don't have a contingency budget for anything sizable, you're screwed right from the off, really.
Yeah, no, completely agree.
And I think typically we would say, if you can, try and have 10%. And like John said, you don't have to use it, but it's helpful if change requests come. And actually at the end of the project, if you haven't used it, and that's obviously the aim, and you can repurpose it for another project. But I think having it there just gives you that flexibility almost. If you do need to change something for whatever reason, you actually can change.
Another question in around, do you recommend any training for new project managers? So I'm guessing this is a question more about if you're going to use an internal resource for project managers. I know, Billy, you'll have an opinion on this, but John, any sort of views on that about training for internal people that are going to be used as project managers?
I think it's really hard to do proper training for project management without being in project, to be honest. I think there's loads of different things you can do, like Prince 2 or the Association of Accredited Project Management, I think it's called. But for example, we've got an internal project manager delivering our website project, and he's doing a fantastic job. But I think part of the reason he's doing such a great job is because he knows all the people, and he's sort of borrowing bits and bobs that he's finding from doing webinars and stuff like that with us. But we've not put him through any sort of formal project management qualification, just because from talking to him, we felt that he'd be good to sort of learn on the job, and had enough in his toolkit already to feel confident to do that. So that's my own view, but Billy may think differently.
It's a good question, and it's a tough question because, like John said, there's different accreditations that you can do, like Prince 2 or like say APM, and they do take a bit of time, and there's a lot of theory behind that. I think fundamentally, I think it's about having the right skill set and the right mindset to deliver projects, and you don't have to be a formally qualified project manager to be a really good project manager. I think a critical skill for me is just having that ability to understand people, and like we've already said on this, it's about people and the change. So I think if you can build those relationships with people, understand the fundamental needs, and like John said, almost sometimes you have to be unpopular as a project manager and you have to make difficult decisions. So I think if you're not afraid to do that and have that strong communications to challenge both upwards and across the organization, and I think you can do it without having to have necessarily gone through a Prince 2 or an APM qualification, because I think the experience of doing that is better than just doing the theory.
Well, one thing I would suggest actually outside of project management training that would be useful for most organizations in my experience is to have maybe a consultant come in and talk to you for at least a day or so in terms of delivering a project in the way that Hart Square would suggest you deliver it. So the definition between a project lead and a project manager and a project sponsor and the SMEs. Just because that way of working is not the way that most charities have worked for the last 100 years. You know, most of them are used to getting a project manager who schedules everything, does everything, probably project sponsors, probably does all of the internal communications as well. So I think there's, you know, the advantage in doing something like that in previous roles that I've had is that you've got something to talk about when you get that sort of senior manager saying, isn't that just your job? What do you mean this is difficult? What do you mean there's more resource required than we thought there was going to be? What do you mean? You've got something to point back to as a sort of combined learning exercise.
And I think just one other point on that is, I think it's all, there is a thing about putting that structure in place as a project manager. I think that's sort of something that's really important, that, you know, yes, you need to be good with people, but you do need to have, you know, your project plan, your risk register, your project governance structures, like we've talked about, your project board, your project teams. There are some fundamental things that you 100% need to sort of understand, I suppose, to put in place to manage a project. It's not, being good with people is one thing, but there is that fundamental governance that underpins any project to make it successful that you really need to put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question is, my preference is that the sponsor is a senior business person or process owner rather than a head of digital or CIO. Is that necessarily your opinion, John?
You don't need, as project sponsor, to have a digital background, I don't think. I've been involved in big projects. Have been digital implementation projects where you've had people like, you know, marketing director or you know, operations director being involved in doing that role. You know, when done effectively, what the project sponsor is supposed to be doing is basically listening to the hygiene of the project, making sure that the project management fundamentals are being looked after. So, are we on time? Are we on budget? Are we on scope? And generally, does this feel as though it's going in the right direction? You know, sort of being the eyes and ears of the project on the ground inside of the organization. So yeah, I don't think you need to have you know, a fantastic knowledge of technology. I actually have found since I've been at Epilepsy Action, my knowledge of the tools is way less than it was a couple of years ago, because I'm just not at the coalface as often. And I do have, I think I've still got a reasonably good technical knowledge, but I don't think that's necessarily important for me to do my job. The bit that's really important for me doing my job is the project management fundamentals, which you should find across other senior managers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy, anything from you on that one?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree, and I think I've worked on a number of projects while at Hart Square that, you know, we've had project sponsors that have fulfilled lots of different roles. You know, I've had a finance director, we've had a digital director, I've had a CEO. So I think it, you know, I've had an IT director. So I think it does vary, and I think what's more important is just that person fills the right role in terms of driving the project forward, holding, you know, the project manager to account, and ultimately is responsible for the project overall. So they probably do need some overall knowledge of what's being delivered, but you don't need to be an expert in, like John said, in digital to do it. And like I say, we've worked with lots of different clients who've had different people fulfill those roles, all done it superbly. So I think everyone brings a different skill set to the role. So probably I'd say don't necessarily narrow it down to it has to be this role. I think as long as the person's got the right sort of skill set and drive, I think they can be a really effective project sponsor.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of time. So another question that come in around comms. So what's the main message in internal comms? Is it, this is what we're doing this week, or is it about exploring the benefits? So yeah, interested in that one. John, I'll come to you first.
So I think back to what I was saying, it's a bit of a blend of the two, really. You know, you do need to continually sell this thing up until and after it's live, just to make sure that everybody believes in it. And I'm a big believer in that they believe in it emotionally. They've got skin in the game, that they want this to be successful, rather than just being a purely logical thing of we have to do that, therefore it's going to happen. So I think there needs to be a mix of sort of, you know, on a practical level, these are the things that we're definitely doing, but then also a kind of, and just to remind you, these are the reasons that we're doing them. This is the sort of bigger picture as to why this is really important. The other thing I'd say as well is that a lot of organizations with internal comms in previous roles I've been involved in have done it all via email or via letters to staff or whatever, and that's just really drab. And I think one of the things that we've tried on our project to do is do video updates for people. So do, like, the moment we were doing a weekly call with the internal communications guy, and he's asking us to summarize things in 60 seconds or less, which is doing two things. A, it's making things succinct, and B, it's putting a face in front of a message so that it doesn't become one of those things that, does someone ever say that? Because you're never going to go and troll through your emails, but you might troll through some videos.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and 60 seconds, keep it concise. I definitely find that a challenge. And Billy, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, having done some of those videos with John, it is a challenge, but it's good to be concise. No, I completely agree with that. I think comms, at the start of the project, almost outlining, why we're doing it, and the high level timelines is really important at the start, and then the sort of more of those regular sort of project status updates, I think is good throughout the project. But then, like I say, more regular project updates and comms, I think, is really important. And sort of like John said, blending the different styles. I don't think just sending out a long email on where things are at. People are really busy and gets lost. So having those sort of snappy videos, I think, has generated some good interaction. Having, almost a staff meeting where you sort of talk and allow people to ask you can be difficult questions at times, I think, is really good. But I think it's important to have different styles, take on that feedback, and then, like I say, have those high level sort of project plan updates, project status updates at various points throughout the project.
Perfect. So I'm going to try and squeeze in one last question. So it'll be a short answer from you guys. What should be done after a project in terms of review? Is there a value in providing a post-project analysis or review to learn from, any mistakes or any of the challenges along the way? So this was John. Is it worth doing a review once you've completed a project?
Yes, absolutely, because it's probably not going to be your last project. So you may as well learn the things that you didn't do so well to make sure you do them better next time. We're still working on getting that right, because I think we're currently so busy in projects that we don't sort of have the time to make sure that organizational learning gets sort of addressed and inputted into people. But yeah, it's something I'm passionate should be done.
Absolutely. Billy, I know
Yeah,
what I'm going to say, but I'll let you say it.
I'll keep it brief. But yeah, I think having a lessons learned at the end of any project is so critical. And I think it is learning about things you could have done differently, but it's also celebrating the success and looking at things that went really well. And I think, we've all done projects there's nothing we would say that we would change something on a future project. You can always learn and take something for a future project. And like John said, highly unlikely that the project you do is the last project you ever do. So I think having a lessons learned, but being really honest, making sure it's not a blame game. It's not about, well, this went wrong and that's your fault. It's just about being honest about the challenges and what could be done better next time. I think if you come sort of an honest, open mind, that it's not a blame game, and those lessons learned that I've done in the past with clients are really effective. And then having that report, and you can share it more widely if you want. I think it's a really good chance for people to input.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to get to everybody's questions. Very happy to follow up with any questions afterwards separately. But one I thought was very worth sharing was just saying, hi, not a question, but wanted to commend John and the Epilepsy Action Team for your work. I have epilepsy and it's been an absolutely fantastic resource over the years. Didn't expect to see Epilepsy Action Team on the panel. So John, a shout out to you and the guys at Epilepsy Action for all the hard working that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you have any feedback on any of the stuff as it starts to go live this year, please do get in touch and let me know. It'd be good to get your feedback as a potential end service user.
Absolutely, definitely. So I just want to say thank you so much for John and Billy for joining us this morning. That's been invaluable, and sorry that we didn't get to cover all of the questions. And just really as an ask from us, we are carrying out a research review that we do it every couple of years. We're carrying out again at the moment, and it's really looking to understand, the questions like this about projects, what works, what doesn't work, what things need to be considered. So we would ask if any of you, if you could fill in the survey. It'll take about 10-15 minutes, and the link will be sent out afterwards. And then if anybody that filled in the survey will be given an advance copy of the research paper, and we'll be having a launch event on that. So we'd be very grateful if any of you could take the time to do that, because it will again be sharing all of that information with the sector. So just to say finally, thank you again, John, for your time. I know how busy you are. I really, really appreciate it. And,
you're very welcome. Thank you.
And Billy, of course, I know you're very busy too. So thank you very much for your time. So thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you another time soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.